Well, good morning and welcome to our accessibility mini workshop designed to help you improve your skills around accessibility best practices. We at the Colorado Department of Public Safety are committed to full inclusion of all individuals. Let's begin with some background information. So what is this all about? House Bill 21-1110 is the accessibility law for state and local government. We must meet accessibility standards for all content, or we can face consequences that can include several options of monetary damages, because it is a civil rights violation. When we abide by this law, we are able to continue our mission of delivering critical public safety to all audiences in Colorado, and in addition, also providing superior public customer service. So today's session, we will go over some information about writing for accessibility and readability. So the first thing to consider is the audience. Who are we writing for? Remember to show consideration for the user's time and deliver the points of the content quickly and accurately. We want to consider also the ability of literacy level of those who are utilizing our documents or who will be reading those. So things to consider are low literacy readers, readers who may have dyslexia or low literacy itself. The Federal Plain Language Writing Act states that clear language needs to be applied to all federal documents, and this was something that was created in 2010. So a little more background in terms of some statistical information to consider as you create this information that you will share with audiences. More than half of Americans between the ages of 16 and 74 experience low literacy in the US. This pans out to be about 130 million people. That's so many that may not understand the content that we're creating. And this has sourced from the 2020 data with the Gallup analysis for the US Department of Education. So things to consider are that before starting your project or document, think about what it is that you want your user to know. What is the purpose? Is it to inform them of something? Is it to describe something? Are we trying to persuade them, or are we making a request? The purpose of your information should be well thought out. Also, be sure that it has a logical order. So pay attention to the organization and the layout. Make sure that your sentence structure is clear and avoid any extra information, such as being overly wordy or having a lot of jargon that could be eliminated from the writing. Instead, use simple words for reading comprehension. If you apply a logical design and layout to your information, it'll be more user-friendly to all readers. Be sure to apply a title that is descriptive on the content in your document or presentation. This gives a clear indication of what the remainder of the article or document is going to be about. Make sure you have structured headings throughout, which means following a comprehensive order of heading 1, 2, 3. So don't start with heading 1 and then skip to heading 3. Just follow that logical order. That's very important for those who use a screen reader or any kind of navigation assistance. Don't skip those numbers. Also important is that we break up the space to make it visually more appealing. Because again, we're trying to create these documents for all users, not just for screen reader users. So breaking up large blocks of text with some white space, it definitely makes it more readable. Use bold or even italics for emphasizing certain parts of your text. However, avoid underlining, because underlining should be reserved for hyperlinks. And it can get confusing if you're underlining for emphasis and the reader is trying to click on it and it doesn't go anywhere. Also important is that you set the text style to Trebuchet MS. Using a sans serif font is definitely advisable. The Trebuchet MS is the state of Colorado brand standard. So now that we've gone through these points, let's look at a few additional extra steps in using plain language. And so what is plain language? When we use plain language, what we are using is clear, concise, and easy to understand vocabulary. So you're using short sentences and short paragraphs because they work better. We're trying to avoid run-on sentences where you forget to put a period in between two complete sentences and it just changes the meaning or the fluency sometimes. It's also important to be using active voice rather than passive voice. And what does that mean? So a normal sentence structure will have a subject, it'll have the action or the verb in the middle, and then there's the object. The subject is the one who does the action, the object is who receives the action. And very often in our government writing, we tend to flip it or reverse the order and we put the object before at the very beginning of the sentence. Let's try to avoid that because it makes our sentences passive. So an example of active voice would be 100 people submitted applications. Whereas passive voice would be applications were submitted by 100 people. So let's try avoid that and use active voice instead. Also very important is that we do not use unnecessarily wordy phrases. Let's just get to the point. So at a later date can just be later. In the event of, just say if, right? So here's a list. It's not a comprehensive list, but there's a way to get started, and just be mindful that in your writing, try to avoid those wordy phrases. Now let's consider some common misconceptions around plain language. First of all, it is not oversimplified or trivialized. It's rather a clearer and concise version of the content. Also perceived is the fact that editing may not be needed for plain language. However, editing is always beneficial to any kind of writing. At least once, try to go through your writing and edit it for improvement. Many writers will use reading level tests as a gauge to indicate if their writing is making sense. Although reading level tests can tell you if you're on the right track, but you have to understand their limitations. These tests only calculate word and sentence length. And while they can be a guide, you should not rely solely on them because you want to make sure that the content is understandable as well. It's not just the word and sentence length that's important. And this leads us to another very common misconception that reading equals comprehension. Not really true, because reading is just phonetically combining letters and sounds, whereas comprehension is building meaning out of those words. And so here is an example of something, even though it's slightly hard, I could read it, but do I understand it? And this is a scientific article talking about the formation of globular clusters. And it goes on to say things like the GC progenitor clusters is restricted to high pressure environments similar to those observed at high redshift, so on and so forth. Now I can read it, but have I understood what I'm reading? Perhaps if I had some contextual knowledge, or if I was a scientist or an astrophysicist, this might have made sense. But to a common person unfamiliar with those things, this definitely does not make sense. So coming back to our presentation, you can also take an opportunity and practice some examples. So on this document, we've given a quick to-do list or things to watch out for. For example, changing that passive voice to active voice, looking for abbreviations and acronyms, because we know that in our government documents, we tend to easily revert to abbreviations and acronyms, but oftentimes the end user may not understand what those stand for. Industry jargon is also very common. Let's try to avoid that. Wordy phrases, and then fancy words. Just go with a simpler term. So on the left-hand side column, there are examples of things that may be tough to read, whereas on the right side, you can practice writing some things that are easier to read versions of that. So for example, in the very first one, just the elimination of a few words has made it more readable. In the second example, we've used that design function and we've broken up that large piece of text into bullet points. Now, if I was to edit this even one step further, I would go ahead and spell out the acronym and abbreviation for FEMA. So it's just being mindful of these things and making sure that we're incorporating it properly in our writing. So there are opportunities here for you to practice some improving your writing for accessibility and readability. And finally, we would highly encourage you to register for this course in Saba, take the short 3-question test, and you can make improvements in your own accessibility skill levels, and improve, help CDPS move the needle towards achieving its overall accessibility goals as well. So we really thank you for your time and your support in doing this. Thank you.